Hey there, welcome to Authentically Raw. I'm your host, Jamie Darris. Tracy Crossly, welcome to the Authentically Raw podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So Tracy is a behavioral relationship expert, which, oh boy, at first I'm like, oh no, I don't want my relationships analyzed, right? She has a book and it is Overcoming Insecure Attachment, which sets us up for our stage because we are going to get into a little bit of the imposter syndrome, but also the attachment theories. And I think that I was introduced to them a couple years ago. And now that I have been, and I have this awareness of it, it's fascinating, and you can see what you know who you are. And once you have the awareness, you pick up a lot of things in your own relationship and how you act, but also in other people. So I can't wait to dive in. But first, I would love to hear more about you, Tracy.
Sure. So I am a behavioral relationship expert. I've been doing it for about 15 years. I have a podcast, written a book. I have 3 children that are grown adults in their 30s. Yes, I do. And I never really mentioned that on podcasts, by the way. Yeah, I got some kids. So what else? I'm not a grandma yet. I have 2 dogs. And I've had this business where I help people with insecure attachment issues and really just watch their lives miraculously change through doing different techniques that most of us, if we were taught as children, we would probably feel a lot more secure all the time, like confident all the time. But I think in our society, there's a lot of things that kind of play against that and give us things like imposter syndrome. So, besides that, what else? I work out, I eat well, and it's funny because if my bio was read, you would hear all of my professional accomplishments, but I think sometimes it gets boring and, it's not all that exciting to listen to. So there you go.
I think it's all good. The personal, the professional, and obviously the relational, which we're going to talk about. And let's dive in and start right out with the different types, the different attachment styles, if you will, because so many people have never even heard of this, let alone, what am I sort of thing.
Of course.
Yeah. And how it all ties in with the imposter syndrome, because up until recently, I guess I never really weaved the two together, but oh gosh, they completely are. So however you want to weave them in and talk about them, I'll leave that up to you. But for, listeners that are brand new, what is this attachment style stuff? Take it away.
Sure. So in the late 60s, Dr. John Bowlby, who was a psychologist, he had been doing all sorts of studies. And one of the studies came to be attachment theory because he was curious about, what's innate and what's learned behavior in babies as far as how they attach to their caregiver or don't attach to their caregiver. And so through his work, he had an assistant named Dr. Mary Ainsworth. And what she did was she took his attachment theory, which is what he came up with, and she was doing experiments. And she did an experiment, it was in 1972. It's called the Strange Experiment, where it was a mom, a baby, and a stranger. And there would be different iterations of that where the stranger would leave or the mom would leave, or there was just something just to see the reaction of the baby. And from that, they came up with these attachment styles, or I should say insecure attachment styles, by observing the baby and their reactions. And ever since then, there's probably, I don't even know how many attachment styles, because every time somebody studies it, they come up with new attachment styles. But the ones that I work with, because I like to keep it simple, basically anxious, anxious-avoidant, or avoidant. And when she did it, I think it was anxious, avoidant, and ambivalent. And ambivalent to me really is the anxious avoidant, because somebody who's anxious avoidant has both tendencies depending on a situation, depending on the level of insecurity they have. And that's the same for any of the attachment styles. And it never has you being yourself. You may think you are being you, but if you notice, if you're a chameleon in different situations, you're not really being you. You're being what you think the situation is calling for. And we learn this through our conditioning as children. I mean, this starts when we're kids. So everything always starts more kids, fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. So would you break them down for us? Like
Sure.
what does it look like to be anxious avoidant or anxious avoidant, which I don't know if this is a good thing or not to say. When you said the anxious avoidant, my first thought was like, it's like the bipolar of two. Which am I? Oh no,
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
know. So, yeah,
Yep.
could you describe what each one is, the characteristics?
Sure. So when you're somebody who's avoidant, let me start back with this. So emotional intimacy is a problem for all three styles, okay? Meaning getting close emotionally to anybody or anything. We can do it with our kids, I think, to a certain degree, but then there's still some of that in the way. So you look at that, right? Now, each has a different reaction. So let's say you're an avoidant. An avoidant is going to look at emotional intimacy and say, in a fantasy like way, I'd love to have that. I'm always looking for the perfect partner. I can never find the perfect partner. I'm always looking actually for perfection everywhere. So most of you perfectionists probably run a little avoidant because it's hard to let people in, because if you let people in, they might know the real you, which of course leads to imposter syndrome, right? So, or it's the same thing. It's like, oh, yeah, you get to know the real me and you're going to get rid of me. You're going to find out who I really am. And so everything that an avoidant does is very protective because they cannot get close to anybody. And they don't want to get close to anybody except in a fantasy like way. And so a lot of times, let's say that they meet somebody and that person likes them, and they may on the first date be like, oh, this is great. And then after that, they're like, oh, no, can't do this. And that's because fear comes in, right? They get anxious. They get anxious about getting closer. And usually when they have someone who likes them, that person is more anxious. And what happens is the anxious person, since this is, the anxious attachment style, they cling, they go for it. They think that they're emotional, usually, oh, I'm an emotional person. But it has nothing to do with that, because your true emotions are not a reaction. And when you meet somebody who's avoidant, it causes a reaction in you that says, I need this person to make me feel whole. I need this person to give me what I feel like I lack. And so when you're coming from that anxious place, you're always afraid of fear of abandonment. All of them are, but to the degree that you hold on to things, you don't do change very well. Change is very difficult for you. You want everything to stay the same. You feel like you want to control it. You have a tendency to be quietly manipulative, where you will say and do things to get people to respond to you rather than saying and doing things because it's meaningful to you, which is a totally different place to come from. And then you have the anxious avoidant, who's kind of a mix of both. And that's what I was. And I I suffered from all of the things I just said, depending on what the situation was. If it was at work, if it was at home, it didn't matter. It would always be this feeling of anxiety. And of course, I didn't want anybody to get close to me as much as I wanted someone to get close to me. But I would purposely choose people who would never get close to me, because at the base of it, I didn't want that. I was too afraid. What's going to happen if they know me? How is that going to work? So my relationships would always have, when I was in one, a distance, an emotional distance, to make sure it's comfortable. Not that we necessarily lived separate lives, but enough so that I didn't feel anxious, right? So it's so interesting how we each take care of our anxiety in different ways. But yeah, when it comes to attachment styles, there's always anxiety at the base of everything.
Right. And when you speak, it reminds me of, say the avoidant and the anxious styles getting together. It's those push-pull relationships. Like, they might get together, and then the avoidant is like kind of turned off and distances themselves. So then the anxious might go, move on, say, and then the avoidant comes back and pulls the anxious back in. And then it's like this back and forth.
Breadcrumbs. Yeah, breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
That was something I talked about a long time ago, like in an article in 2015. And then all of a sudden it became a big thing about 4 years ago. But it was about breadcrumbs, because that avoidant is giving you enough breadcrumbs so that when they come back in, which they're not necessarily planning to be, it's not like they're devious, but they come back in, you're like, oh my God, they're back. Okay, great. And you're thinking, as an anxious, you've got another opportunity. But little do you know, it's just going to be the same cycle. And you can be stuck in that cycle for years.
So with the insecure or the anxious attachment, how, like, where do you think, like, when you, if you, I don't know if you want to go back to like the studies, like, where does this come from inside? Like each one.
So each one comes from this fear of abandonment, fear of
Okay.
loss. The
Okay.
ultimate, fear any human being can have is a fear of loss of life, right?
Mhm.
That's the biggest fear. So everything from that down. And so, when you have a sense of lack, which we all do when we have attachment issues, we have a sense of scarcity. We have a sense of scarcity of resources, meaning love. And everything from that. It could be money, house, whatever, everything. And so when you're operating from that place, you're operating in a vacuum because you're always going to have that limitation of, well, there's only so much love, there's only so much money, there's only so much, so many jobs, there's only so many of anything. So we always have the state of lack. And so most of us are operating externally. Well, I should say everybody who has attachment issues is operating externally, meaning I'm looking for extrinsic reward. I'm looking for extrinsic validation. I need from out here to tell in here it's okay. Somebody who's more secure doesn't really need that when it comes to love. It's like they don't have those kind of issues, they don't have those kind of fears. And I think that a lot of people do have attachment issues that if they sat for a second, they would go, oh my gosh, yes, because codependency is insecure attachment. Absolutely. It's, I need you to take care of my emotional state, and I'll take care of your emotional state, but we're not going to take care of our own emotional state.
Mm-hmm. So true. Well, and even when you say like the codependency with the anxious, but it reminds me even of people pleasing, because we think, oh, we're going to, it's based on other people, and it's not.
Right.
It's really based on what's inside of us, but that's not that's not what's going on in our heads at all whatsoever. It's all about you,
Right.
Definitely. Right. So how does imposter syndrome tie in? Imposter syndrome seems to be a big topic, but I feel so many people relate it to confidence issues. Like, oh, I just feel like a fraud. Like I don't, you know what I mean? I didn't really hear it until recently be tied in with our attachment styles. How do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So when you're talking about insecure attachment, the first word is insecure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I have insecurities, which I do, a lot of times people who have insecure attachment don't really know what they're doing here. They've built a persona. I'm going to build a persona that says I'm an overachiever, let's say, or I'm going to build a persona that says I take care of everybody. I'm going to build a persona that says I'm a victim. Most people, of course, when you're 5 years old, you're not thinking I'm going to build the persona. But what we do is we get certain feedback in our environment. Oh, I got an A. Look at what happens. I got attention, right? So you think I'm going to get another A because I want to get more attention. And what we are is we're moving outside of who we are authentically, and we're moving into what is going to get me something. And before we know it, we've built this facade, where of course imposter syndrome is going to happen because that facade isn't really you. It's an aspect of you, but it's not entirely you. And so the other parts that you reject, let's say, again, going to the overachiever who's a perfectionist and, they're working hard. They may become a workaholic in school, right? I'm going to, win as many trophies as I can, whatever. But the point is, when you're doing that, you're saying the other parts of you aren't worth it. The other parts of you don't deserve recognition or don't even deserve your own recognition. And so by, I don't want to say divorcing yourself from yourself, but in a sense doing that, then you have this self out here, the self that you present everywhere, whether it's to a job, to a relationship, to a friendship, to, society in general. And if somebody gets beneath that, right, this part that you really put a lot into, what's going to be here? Nothing. So of course you feel like an imposter in that. What if I get found out? What if somebody gets through that part of me? They're going to have expectations that I can't obviously commit to, or I can't do, because they're going to find out that I'm not worth it, or I don't have that value. So does that make sense?
Definitely. And what it makes me think of is just completely disconnecting from yourself. It's that self-abandonment of who you truly are. And then all of a sudden you step into this new identity that you've created through other people or outside things, you know, achievements or whatever you're doing. You've created it, but it's not who you are. And you become an imposter, but how confusing. And I feel like just all these bells are going off inside of me of how all of a sudden you wake up one day, whether I think it starts earlier and earlier because it used to be, oh, midlife crisis. But I feel like even your 20 somethings, you know, it's like they're having these breakdowns. I don't know who I am, what I want, what's my purpose. And all of a sudden we wake up and we're lost. And we truly are basically imposters to ourselves. And how do you get back to yourself?
Right. I know.
Yeah.
And I want to say, yes, snap your fingers, but you have to, first of all, realize you're going to have resistance. Like you could say, oh my gosh, I want to get rid of this anxiety. You know, I'm doing these things and I feel horrible or what have you. Right. And the thing is, you have resistance to that change. That's familiar to you. Human beings like familiarity. We like the same. And when you start to want to take a deeper dive and go, okay, I'm going to change. So the resistance comes up. It comes up in what you would be afraid to lose. So you might be ruminating on, oh my God, if I do this, I'm going to lose this. If I do that, I'm going to lose this. You know, it comes to that. So, you know, I would say the first thing that you can actually do is to become aware of what internally you're saying to yourself, because that's your ego, or people, you know, will call it your inner critic or what have you, but it's your ego. And it's basically, again, wanting to save you, wanting to keep things the same. And it's just to start listening to, what is this thing actually saying to me? What kind of self-talk is actually happening here? Right.
Yeah.
And then you can make a choice of, all right, so now I'm aware. What do I feel when I'm ruminating? What are the feelings in my body? A lot of us don't pay attention to the feelings in our body. We're just in our heads, but you can't feel feelings in your head. Your emotions aren't felt in your head, even though we'd like to think they are. They're not. So you have to start taking a deep dive into what's going on inside of me. Wow, I've ignored all these reactions my whole life. And a lot of us have, and that creates anxiety. Like if you actually just start to feel what your reactions are, because we always have a physical reaction to anything that happens. But you just start paying attention to that, you're going to start feeling more connected and more grounded to yourself.
So these feelings, I think my thought is, okay, well, you have these feelings, you have these anxious feelings. First, I guess it's be aware when, how often, who you're with, what it surrounds. But now what? What do I do with them? I think the how is where so many people get caught up. If we can take the time to stop and be aware, okay, I'm anxious or I'm avoidant or I'm a little bit of both. What do I do with myself? Because now I have more anxiety over that, right?
Right. I know. It's crazy. We can make ourselves crazy. Yeah. And the thing is, so first of all, yes, becoming aware, but it's becoming aware of all your feelings, because when you are blocking feelings, which anybody who has an insecure attachment style, you're always blocking feelings, because as a child, it didn't feel safe to feel, let's say, negative feelings, pain, whatever, even though living with anxiety is painful. But we have this idea that somehow there's some boogeyman living inside of us that's all of a sudden going to pop its ugly head out, right? And we're not going to be able to handle it. So what you want to do is you want to recognize all of the feelings, not just the insecure ones. What is there? What am I feeling? Like when you're with a friend, you know, check into your body. What am I actually feeling right now? Now, one thing you can do action-wise, which is very difficult, even though it's going to sound simple, and it's difficult because if you think of a situation where you're not yourself, it would be really hard. And that is to be honest with what's happening for you. Like you could be out with a friend and notice you're anxious with this friend. And you could say, you know what? I notice that every time we go shopping, or every time we're having lunch, or every time, you know, we're doing something together, I feel anxious. And I'm not saying this to you because it's something I feel you can fix. I'm saying this to you because I'm noticing it and I'm realizing I need to do something about that, right? That'd be really hard for some of us to say. That'd be really hard to say, let's say if you're dating somebody, that'd be really hard, you know, if you're in a power struggle with your mate, it would be very difficult to say these things, but they're truths. When you start saying truths, you start to build internal confidence, internal value, because guess what? You're paying attention to the real you versus the filling up your imposter, with accolades. Instead, you're starting to go, okay, what's happening in here? That's changing things. So, so these things help a lot. It's just a matter of doing it. And like I said, we always have resistance. Oh, that sounds stupid. Oh, that's not going to do anything. And then we just keep doing the same old crap, different day.
Exactly. And I think how, we avoid the conflict or the awkwardness, and the uncomfortableness of speaking up and saying, I feel really anxious, blank. And what was going through my head is, okay, so which one is it harder for? The anxious style to not be able to speak our truth because we're avoiding the conflict, or the avoidant because, it's all a fear of abandonment, but if they want to avoid the conflict. And then the one in the middle too is just like, God, right? It's this avoidant almost on all realms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it does. It goes back to what you said about the fear of abandonment.
And
we
intimacy.
Ourselves, right?
Right. We abandon ourselves. Yeah. And also there's a fear of intimacy. So an avoidant does not, like if they are going to divulge something, a lot of times it's very much a choreographed, strategized statement. So what they've done is they've overthought it. They're strategizing. How is this going to land with this person? I want to make sure it lands well, but that doesn't make them want to get closer to me, because that would be a burden and I'd feel engulfed by that. And if I'm engulfed by it, because that's the fear, of course, is to be engulfed by somebody else's feelings and feel responsible for them. And I will say that a lot of the clients I've had that have that issue have been brought up by overprotective parents. And that's, instead of parents who were, let's say, inconsistent or what have you, it's usually the overprotective ones. Because there's this idea of, I'm going to disappoint them, and yet I feel responsible for them prematurely and in ways that I'm actually not responsible for them. So yeah, it really depends on your attachment style. But even an anxious, as much as they think that they want that emotional bond, they don't really, because they wouldn't know what to do with it. And so they will, it's so funny because they'll do things that have nothing to do with what, let's say real love is, what real caring is, because they won't be honest, because they are afraid of losing, I don't want to say the victim position, but the more victimized position. Because what happens if somebody doesn't feel sorry for me or feel compelled to rescue me or what have you?
Mm-hmm. And even with the anxious, I feel sometimes they are more, I'm going to use the word needy. Mm-hmm. But yet they can't stand needy people. And I see that a lot. I know I like just in coaching, I see a lot of people pleasers, and a lot of them are, high achieving people and would never classify themselves as needy. And I hate needy people, but at the core of the anxious, the codependent, the people pleaser is a neediness. Like, I matter, I'm worthy, and I need to earn that through you. Right. But there's that, like, it's not, it's more of a subconscious thing that no, it's everybody else, or, we're actually the ones that are needy. And where does someone start though, as far as I want to be in a secure, I want to be secure. And what, I guess that's probably a good thing. So describe to me, what does secure attachment style look like? A good definition.
Secure attachment, sure. So secure attachment style is consistency. At the beginning of a relationship, it's a state of progression, not when you're pulling somebody towards, let's get married, whatever, but there's a state of progression. There's open communication. There's a sense of peace, not drama. It's like knowing that this is the rock, and the rock is going to stay there, and the rock isn't going to disappear, or the rock isn't going to cling to me. And they have a completely different perspective of what love is. Like, they actually aren't attaching in a negative way. There's an attachment that happens that's secure, which means I know you're going to be there, I'm going to be there, and there's an emotional freedom in that. And there's an emotional intimacy in that because there's not a fear of getting close, and either, the avoidant being afraid of engulfment, or the anxious wanting to cling and have themselves filled up by that person. So it's just a different, I would never have known it had I not done this work and, met my second husband. And frankly, it's just been a game changer in terms of comparing that relationship to pretty much any relationship I ever had. Totally different.
Definitely. So my question would be to elaborate on, which relationships can actually make it, which ones will, not necessarily that they will end in a breakup or a divorce, because sometimes they just stay together, even though it's like, all the time.
Yeah.
Because I obviously wouldn't guess that an avoidant and an anxious style would really be in a healthy long-term relationship. I can just see that exploding. And so does it have to be two secure people? Can it be a secure with an avoidant, a secure with an anxious? Like, what do these relationships between all of the different attachments styles look like? And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting. So I'm going to give you a couple examples just because two people that I trained as coaches that work with me, when they both started working with me, were in attached relationships. One of the coaches ended up marrying her attachment, and the other one is in a long-term relationship with the guy. So I bring this up because they were both, one of my clients was more anxious. The other one was an anxious-avoidant. Okay. And they were both with people who were more avoidant. The issue was more about how they came through to actually create a secure relationship. So a lot of times we don't realize people are reacting to us. Right. And when you have a certain vibe you're giving off, where in the one who was anxious avoidant, she was inconsistent. So the other person, that she was seeing wasn't really sure what the heck was going on. He had no idea. And so as she was working on herself and she was becoming more secure, it became a relationship that actually had a lot of give and take. And she's like super happy and they have a very happy relationship. But that's why I say, like, there's no, oh, this isn't going to work. It's a matter of, as you change and as you grow, your relationship will do that. And either you'll get to a point where you're like, this isn't working for me. I don't want to do this anymore, and go in peace. Or the other person starts to evolve with you,
right.
And that's what happened with my other client who was more anxious. Her boyfriend, who I don't know how long they've been together, but they've been together a long time. They're moving in together. And all these things are happening. And it's just so funny because when I first met her, I thought this relationship at first, I'm like, oh, I wonder if this relationship will last. So it became, as she became more open and she took more responsibility for her emotional state rather than looking to him to fix it, it changed things dramatically. And as she grew more confident and grew her value, she stopped looking at the relationship as something to save her and rather taking care of herself. So it was like, to me, that's more, because if you're looking just for somebody to be secure and you're insecure, what's going to happen if they leave? What's going to happen if, they pass away? Like, you're going to be left with your attachment style. And to me, that's not a way to live, because if I need somebody who's like, I always picture like a bottle of wine and a cork. Like, if I need somebody to be my cork all the time, then I'm never going to have that sense of emotional freedom. And I'm never going to explore the depths emotionally of intimacy with another person, because it's just going to be safe. It's like, okay, this is safe. This looks good. And, I don't really have to do anything different, and they're going to answer all my needs and blah, blah, blah. So does that make sense?
Definitely. And it's almost as if you'd become more insecure, because the more you basically allow them to take over, I can see your insecurities even rising. I mean, you're not going to get more confident that way. Right. And I think a lot about the power thing. It's like handing your power over to someone else, and pretty soon you do feel kind of powerless. But really, too, so it's not that if two different styles get together, it's not impossible that it could work, but it really takes, the one person probably first to start to grow and develop through it. And then, it's really each individual, their own personal growth and development. And like you said, if the one person grows, they're either going to help the other person grow or be like, I'm good, goodbye. I'm out of here.
Right.
Yeah. So with your 8, the one thing though, I mean, I think it's so clear to have, the avoidant type style in your head and the anxious. What is a little bit blurry is the anxious avoidant.
Sure.
Is there like does it go through certain times? Like how would something like that develop? It's this yin
So
and yang.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, and speaking as somebody who's been anxious avoidant, so let's put it this way, in a dating situation, the anxious avoidant is somebody who doesn't really like themselves. Well, none of them like themselves. Okay. So an anxious avoidant goes on a date. If the person that they're with seems to like them more than they like themselves, they're like, I need to get out of here. This person's going to be clingy. This person's not going to, be good for me. You're already labeling that person as having a problem. Okay. Let's say you go on a date and you're with somebody who seems to not like you as much as you're starting to like them. Like you're picturing, and I always say, don't fantasize, stay in the moment. But, you're starting to go into, oh, wow, maybe this could be the person. Maybe my perfect partner is sitting in front of me. And so you become more anxiously inclined, right? You're starting to already get attached to the idea of who you think they are and what they're going to do for you. And so in a dating situation, that's what happens. So a lot of times people who are anxious avoidant will spend a lot of time single. And that's because they're afraid to date, or they feel like, what's the point? I'm not going to meet anybody. And then they, like I said, they do, and it goes one way or it goes the other. And then they just feel like, well, nothing's going to ever work out for me. Something's wrong with me. And the same thing goes in work situations too. Like the anxious avoidant, they're not consistent. They're inconsistent. There's this idea of, again, they don't want anything to trap them or to get into the wrong situation. They have a very well-developed sense of right or wrong. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's so much, there's so many details, but the anxious avoidant is somebody who, there was a book I read, I don't know, like 10 years ago, and it was talking about the anxious avoidant in a little teeny part of it, because it was talking about anxious or avoidant. And they're like, if you're anxious avoidant, you're kind of screwed. Because you don't know if you're coming or going, right? You end up in the yo-yo relationships, you're coming, you're going, because even in an attached situation, let's say you're anxious avoidant and you are anxiously attached to somebody, you're also going to be avoidant at the same time. So let's say that you want them to go out with you, right? And they're like, oh, well, I'll see, maybe this week, whatever. And then they start going out with you and you start having more stability in the relationship. You're going to create drama. You're going to unconsciously create something that is going to basically distance that person and distance yourself, so that you can get back to that comfort zone of distance and then keep reacting to that all the time, acting like you want to get close. So you don't even see most of your own actions.
Right. And it makes me think of, because, this isn't just intimate relationship stuff. This is with your friends. Right. It could be a parent-child relationship, coworkers, anything. And to me, that avoidant anxious probably has, I'm a mom of 4. So I think, you being a mom of 3, you have a different relationship with each of your child. And you often think, well, that's what this kid is like, or that's what this friend is like. So that's why my relationship is kind of like that with them, because this is how they are. When really, it's a lot with how we are too, because I'm just going to say the parent-child relationship, it makes you wonder, like, say, if you are the avoidant anxious, do you have an ancient sort of attachment style with one kid and an avoidant with another kid? And like, and I can see how that would, I don't want to say, how the book you read, oh, you're screwed if you have that, but in friendships and even with coworkers, how that could, anxiety, right? That it creates inside.
Well, it does. And, again, you're like a chameleon, depending on who you're with or what you're doing. You're going to find yourself changing, and that's, again, where imposter syndrome comes in, because you're acting in every role that you're in. So where are you really, the real you? You're not really there, because there's a lot of fear. I can look back on raising my 3 kids, and I didn't know any of this when I was raising my kids at all, and I could say I love them unconditionally. And I think I was codependent, if I was honest. I was probably codependent with my kids. Absolutely. Any hurt they had, I was in pain. Any disappointment, let me take care of that. But when it came to certain emotional intimacy, I could also see where I would back off at times and not realize it. I can only see that in hindsight, because my kids were always my favorite people and they're still my favorite people. But, I look at them as adults and I can definitely see their attachment style too. So, yeah.
Definitely. And it's nice when you do know your own, when you can kind of see other people's attachment styles, because you do show up better in a relationship. I mean, really, truly. And there's not all that codependency and this power struggle or whatever it may be. So for anyone just discovering, Tracy, their attachment styles or wanting to learn more or even get help, like, where do people go with this? What do I do?
Well, I would say you could join any of my programs. I have a group program. It's called Mastery. And the reason I say that is I've had a lot of therapists who've referred clients to what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is a 6-month transformational group program that really will help you to get grounded in being who you really are versus your attachment style. That means getting rid of anxiety. That means dealing with your avoidant tendencies. That means becoming self-responsible, learning what real self-love is, things like that really help you to feel more whole, more grounded, more at peace, ability to make choices that you don't beat yourself up over. And the other thing is I have a book, The Overcoming Insecure Attachment, which is really a how-to guide. Like when you were asking earlier about how to, and like my book is just full of exercises and activities and telling you this is what you need to do if you want to change this. So, that's what I would say. I also have, my podcast, Freedom from Attachment. There's like 700 episodes. Wow. So many episodes. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So there's a lot there on anything and everything under the sun when it comes to attachment.
Okay. And I know that there's a quiz on your website. Is there one in the book as well?
No, but in the book, because it's not so much about the attachment styles, it's about getting to the core of what makes you insecure in the first place and how to actually change that.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's part of it is, we might have an idea, I'm probably this, but sometimes you start really reading and you dive in and you're like, oh, maybe I'm that, or I do this, or I'm the hot mess. I'm both, right? Or somebody reads it and they are like, I'm secure, right? I'm the secure one.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, this is what I always say too, by the way, is anytime, because I've had this quiz, I think for like 6-7 years, and the book, it came out a couple of years ago. And it's just funny because if people are reading that, I'm going to tell you have insecurities, because people who are secure, it doesn't even come under their radar to even think this way. So yeah.
I might not be. Absolutely. Nope. So true. Well, thank you so much. I mean, what a ton of fabulous information and just an eye opener, especially for people brand new to this stuff, because it's so fascinating. And I mean, our whole life is a relationship. It starts the relationship with ourselves. And I mean, I that's how I like to look at everything, and especially self-development, is you have a relationship with everything. You have a relationship with obviously other people, with food, with money, with your body. It's all a relationship. And the more we know about it, it's, to me, a lot of that outside stuff that's, seems problematic, it really dissolves, a lot of it, once you go inward and work on that relationship. So this is a fabulous way. I'm going to put everything in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to leave with our listeners?
You can go to my website too and find other things. I have plenty of information. I also have a blog there, which it's kind of old, but it really still has a lot about attachment. So there's I have a free Facebook group too, but all of that's on the website, tracycrossly.com.
Okay. Lots of material to sift through. That's for sure. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Tracy, for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here as we kick off this podcast together. I really appreciate you joining me on this journey, because I'm well aware you could be doing or listening to anything right now. Hey, if you enjoy the authentically raw content, please support the show by following, rating, and reviewing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can also follow me on social media for daily inspiration.
Head over to my website, jamiebarris.com, to sign up for weekly transformation tips. Or if you're interested in coaching, I currently have 3 openings for one-on-one coaching. If you're looking for an empowering community, we'd love for you to join us in the Transformation Tribe, our group coaching membership. More info available on my website under the Life Coaching and Membership tabs. One last thing, I'm rooting for you. Be real, be raw, be authentic.